All right, so since it looks like we're going to go to war with Iran, nobody knows why, uh, but in lieu of that, or because of that, I wanted to comment or react to this debate that Dave Smith had and Dinesh D'Souza. And Dave Smith he's a fairly well-known comedian. He's been a good anti-war voice, which I really appreciate. He's real consistent on that, and I think he is. Yeah, he's an honorable guy. And the other guy is Dinesh D'Souza. I, I honestly, I don't think he's very honorable. I don't think Dinesh D'Souza is an honest actor. I think he's paid to spout whatever neocon nonsense is out there. But that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. So, okay, here we go. We're just going to start right into it. And I haven't watched this debate yet, but so I'm gonna react to it and try to add, with any of these debate reactions, I'm gonna try to add my flavor and context. And it's all about seeking the truth. So, okay, here we go.
Question, Dave. What is America First? You have the floor uninterrupted for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Judge, and thank you, Dinesh, for doing this. I really appreciate it. I've always considered Dinesh to be one of the coolest and most honorable members of Conservatism, Inc., and part of that is demonstrated in the fact that he's here to do this debate, whereas a lot of the other ones talk a lot but won't show up to do it. Then again, I will say being the coolest member of Conservatism, Inc. is a pretty low bar, but I meant it as a compliment. Look, America First means non-interventionism. It means a preference for republicanism, little r, over imperialism. And that's what it's always meant. And it's got a long, rich tradition in American politics. I believe the first noted usage of the term was by the worst president in the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson, but he used it when he was running and campaigning. Now, as many of you younger people know, a whole lot of times presidents campaign on one thing and then do the exact opposite. All you got to do is think about George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So Woodrow Wilson used the term America First when he was promising to keep us out of World War I. That was what he ran on. Of course, he flipped on that and ultimately got us involved. And then the term America First was used by the old right to oppose military venturism. It was used by figures like Garrett Garrett and Robert Taft. And in fact, I think there was a really big organization that was opposed to U.S. entry into World War II, led by Charles Lindbergh, and what did they call it? The America First Committee, of course. And then, of course, Pat Buchanan, when he was running for president, he used the term America First. And what did it mean? It meant we're against the neoconservatives. We're for a non-interventionist foreign policy. And Donald Trump picked up on the exact same theme. And he said he wanted to break with neoconservatism. He wanted to break with regime change wars. In fact, when Donald Trump was running for re-election, he bragged about no new wars. This was the entire credo. And so to try to pretend, as many of the hawks are now, that America First just means this vague something that's good for America. America First means toppling the Ayatollah on behalf of Israel, or America First means flirting with wars of choice and wars of aggression is nonsense. And that's never what anyone who's been using the term has meant by it. And in fact, all you got to do is go back to 2016 when all of the hawks who now are saying they get to define what Trumpism is, they all objected to America First. There's all types of great quotes that you could find from Ben Shapiro and Bill Kristol and them who said, we don't like that he's saying America First. That's anti-Semitism or something like that. But of course, their beef was always that they knew what the term meant.
Yeah, if you notice in today's discourse, like words really have no meaning anymore. Everything's a communist, everything's a socialist, everything's gay, everything's, these. I mean, Dave's right that it's not just America First, right? People are constantly co-opting words to kind of muddy the water, what things mean. What does America First mean? What does MAGA mean, right? We're all just kind of, no, it means this, no, it means this. It's, I talk a lot about how the powers that be, they're trying to muddy the waters, right? They want chaos. They want people to not know what the hell they're talking about. They love that, right? So, yeah, I like that Dave is, okay, yeah, America First. Part of that is non-interventionist. Kind of funny that Woodrow Wilson was non-interventionist, and he got us into World War I, and Trump was supposed to be a non-interventionist, and he's, I don't know, I'm losing track of how many wars he started and ended and started, and he wants to start back up. So, yeah.
And the term meant that we're not going to go fight wars to make the military-industrial complex rich. We're not going to fight wars on behalf of Israel that are not in the interest of the United States of America. And that's what Donald Trump capitalized on, and that's what he's abandoned. And that is why there's this huge split on the right wing between the people like me, who wish to be America First, and the people like Dinesh, who evidently, although he admits he was completely wrong to cheerlead the war in Iraq, has not learned his lesson from that and is still flirting with more wars of choice. That's all.
Thank you, Dave. Dinesh, your opening statement, which, if you wish, can include a response to what Dave said, but he used about 3.5 to 4 minutes. You have your full 5.
Glad to be here. I always enjoy debate formats, and this is a very important issue because it goes to the heart of.
Sorry, I'm going to put it at 1.125 speed for everyone's benefit. So here we go.
The future of MAGA, not just in the Trump era, but beyond. I don't understand America First quite in the sort of particularistic historical context. It's irrelevant to me what Charles Lindbergh believed or what people thought in the 1930s or 40s about the term. I think that the popularity of America First is because of the general sort of realism of the term. In other words, we live in America. Our allegiance is to America. This is our country, and our patriotism is based on an attachment to our country. Now, our country has ideals, and it also has interests. So what are our ideals?
So let me pause there. So, nation states in general were an invention by transnational capital, by super rich. And all these wars, every single one, name a war, it's all in the benefit of transnational capital. It's in benefit of military industrial complex. We don't get any, the American people don't get any dividends. We don't get a goddamn thing from all these wars and adventurism. Okay, so see what he's starting on. I'm obviously going to be very critical of Dinesh. He's starting on saying, he's basically intimating, you got to be loyal to America, and then he's going to conflate. And not having watched this before, he's going to conflate, going out and basically steal other people's resources as this is good for America, but it's really not.
Well, an attachment to a constitutional republic, an attachment to freedom, by which we mean things like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, a government that is accountable, at least in some procedural terms, to the people, free markets. So these are our ideals. But countries also have interests. And interests have to do with things like this guy has a lot of oil and we could use some of that. And this country has rare earth minerals and we could use some of that. So quite apart from our ideals, the truth of it is that we are a powerful country in the world, by the way, very different than we were at our founding. One of the problems with people invoking isolated quotations from the founding, we should not go in search of monsters to destroy, is that is always the natural position of a fledgling republic. It's kind of like an infant in the playground saying, I don't want to get into any fights with anybody. That's because I'm 3 years old and they're going to run all over me. But that doesn't necessarily become the position of the guy when he's a teenager, when his position of power is completely different to the other guys on the playground. So this is what I mean by realism. Realism is taking account of the fact that we are a powerful country today, we have ideals and interests, and we live in a hostile world. So living in a hostile world means that the world is populated by not only good guys and bad guys, there are plenty of those, but people who are beneficial to our interests and people who are harmful or inimical to that. The idea that we should pretend that this is not so, which is essentially the isolationist position, it's closing your eyes, sticking your 2 forefingers in your ear.
So why do we live in a hostile world? Iran is our enemy because we made them our enemy. Like they have been trying to make peace with us for a long time. And we left the JCPOA, right? We have constantly tried to provoke Iran to war. Okay, we bombed, we assassinated their leader, Qasem Soleimani. We exited JCPOA. More recently, we tried to shatter their country with all the protests. This just happened a few weeks ago. So, he's not adding that context that the only reason Iran is an enemy of ours is because we created them. We want them to be an enemy. And
and acting like you're the only country in the planet. This is illusion and this is idiocy. Why? Because the bad guys of the world will never leave you alone. The bad guys in the world recognize you're top dog. You have the biggest GNP. They want to displace you as the world's sole superpower. They, in fact, would rather see you flat on your back. They make complex alliances with each other. The BRICS alliance, let's come up with a different currency and undermine the dollar. They have all kinds of currencies. Let's Russia and China unite with Iran and let's all move into Nicaragua, which is just a couple of 1,000 miles from Miami. That's an excellent base from which we can conduct operations against the United States.
So, yeah, here again, he doesn't talk about.
Let's try to find out.
Sorry, he doesn't talk about BRICS. Why? Why is China and Russia forming the BRICS alliance? Right? Why is Iran, have a defensive posture towards the United States? It's because the United States is controlling the world, trying to bully and control the world. We do it through the IMF and the World Trade Organization. We do it through sanctions. We United States are the bad guys that are constantly bullying other countries. So of course they're going to respond. Of course they're going to try to take back sovereignty. We've been trying to shatter Russia into 100 pieces for hundreds of years. Since I think World War I. We're trying to shatter Iran into 100 pieces so we can shatter it and steal the resources We did the same playbook we did in Syria, Libya, Iraq. So we're doing it in Somalia, Lebanon. So of course, our aggression, the United States, trying to bully and control these countries, obviously it's going to provoke a response. And he's saying, well, he's not adding any of that context, right? He's basically saying, well, because they haven't submitted to our bullying, we need to bully them more, is really what he's trying to say.
A way to sneak through the border. So all of these are external threats. And these external threats connect directly with our domestic politics. So America First, to me, is a recognition that it is good for us to protect our ideals, and it is good for us to protect our interests. So we have to always evaluate, are our ideals at stake? Are our interests at stake? Does it make sense for us to get involved over here? And that doesn't settle the question of how. Do we send troops? Do we send advisors? When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Reagan didn't send troops, but he sent some CIA advisors. He gave the Mujahideen some handheld rockets to shoot down Soviet helicopters. And the effect of that was to ultimately weary the Soviet Union, drive it out of Afghanistan. That supported our ideals. That supported our interests. So there are innumerable examples where the U.S. has intervened effectively, where regime change has worked out beautifully. And the counterexample generally relies on a single case, Iraq.
So no, that's not a true statement that regime change and regime change has never worked out. Like I don't know what he's talking about. There's numerous examples. No, I mean the Afghanistan. Yeah, I mean he brings up Afghanistan. That was a terrible example, right? I mean we basically spent how many trillions of dollars or in Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. So what is he talking about?
Iraq all over again. That only works for people who have essentially a 2 decades view of history.
Okay, we're going to stop at this point. You stopped it.
So see, he's admitting, my rhetoric hasn't worked in 2 decades, and it hasn't worked ever. But just because it hasn't worked in the last 20 years, it'll work now. That's what he's saying.
Exactly 5 minutes. Dave, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to reply.
Okay, well, first of all, the John Quincy Adams quote that you mentioned when he said going around the world looking for monsters to destroy, he said, we will become the dictatress of the world, but we will lose our own soul. So he certainly was not saying it's because we're weak. He even predicted at the time that we could dominate the entire world. His point is that we would lose those ideals that you're speaking of. And even when you say this, Dinesh, like, it's nice that you say that the Constitution and free markets are one of your ideals, but you've destroyed these ideals. You and all of Conservatism Inc. They're currently asking for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. The Constitution does not allow us to be an empire, and the Constitution is what created this federal government. And all of the politicians put their hand on a Bible and swear before God and all of us that they will defend it. And all these wars are totally illegal. Donald Trump was not repelling an invasion in Venezuela or in Iran. He had all the time in the world to go to Congress and get permission, but he didn't. And as far as sitting there and saying the isolationist or the position relies on you closing your eyes and pretending that none of these things exist, this is the exact same thing that you and all your friends said in the war in Iraq. And that you're right. It wasn't that they were closing their eyes, just that they were making a wiser calculation than you and all of your friends who got 1 million people killed and cost us trillions of dollars. And I'm sorry, but the only example of disastrous intervention we have is Iraq is nonsense. We go back to the 50s in Iran, in Guatemala, where we overthrew the commie government and hundreds of thousands of people died there. You could look at Ukraine, you could look at Libya, Syria, Somalia, Afghanistan, Yemen. We got examples all over the place of this thing turning into catastrophes. But every single time that you guys want to sell us on a war of choice, a war of aggression, you just say, you don't understand how complicated the world is. You don't.
Right. So Dave's 100% spot on. I mean, all of these wars of choice have been disasters, but the banks, they do pretty good. Raytheon, Boeing, they do pretty good in these wars.
Understand the threats that we have. And then you all have your plans about how Chalabi is going to be embraced and we'll be greeted as liberators. And every single time it blows up in our faces. So I just think this is totally you're saying a lot of things that sound nice, but the onus is on you. And the onus is always on you if you're going to launch a war to demonstrate how clearly you know that this is going to work out well. And you guys just launch them so haphazardly, even when the last 6 that you've supported have blown up in your face. It's truly unbelievable. I can't believe you're here still advocating for it again.
Thank you, Dave. Dinesh, 2 minutes to respond to Dave Smith.
The United States, right in the aftermath of World War II, enforced regime change on a whole bunch of societies, including notably Japan and Germany, and the results have been excellent. In the Cold War, which was a war, it might have been a war, as Margaret Thatcher said, quote, without firing a shot, but there was an awful lot of defense spending that went into it. There were an awful lot of missiles that were built, the MX missile, the B-1 bomber, and so on. In the Cold War, you had innumerable examples of regime change. Ceausescu was out in Romania. There were tyrannical governments that were out in East Germany, in Poland, in Bulgaria, essentially the entire Soviet orbit, including the Soviet Union itself. Is anyone going to say regime change in the Soviet Union was not a good idea when the Communist Party abolished itself and got rid of it? In the 1990s, George H.W. Bush assembled a coalition to eject Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. That was forcible regime change. That's why Kuwait is basically a free country today. Is it perfect? No, it's a monarchy. It's a autocratic society, but it's stable. It has good relations with the United States. So that advanced our ideals and our interests. So again, there's example after example after example. Let's take the two that probably are the only ones that benefit you, and that is Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, there are two aspects here that should be distinguished, and they typically get conflated. The first one is the regime change itself, and the second one is the kind of managerial aftermath. So was the United States wrong to fling the Taliban outside of Afghanistan? Those are the guys who provided the monkey bars for the terrorists of 9/11. We were directly attacked on our own soil. It was completely right. It was both in our interest and it supported our ideals to go over there and pulverize them. Now, if you fast forward 5 years and I see this ridiculous sight of U.S. generals supervising some, tribal meeting and trying to tell them how to conduct the meeting and how their schools should be run and what their attitude should be toward girls, this is the nonsensical aftermath. This is the Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell nonsense that if you break it, you got to fix it. We somehow have to own these societies. That's pure bullshit. So I say, yes to the regime change and no to the aftermath.
I can tell from the look on your face you want to respond before I start with the questions, Dave. Go right ahead, please. 2 minutes, more or less.
Well, okay, so Dinesh points out the successful regime changes in Japan and Germany, but what he leaves out there is the tens of millions of civilians that had to be slaughtered in order to do that, and the decades and decades and decades of military occupation that followed. And so if you're telling me that anyone in the United States of America has the stomach for anything like that right now, we both know that's just completely off the table. Even if you can get past the little pesky morality of it, there's just no way that anyone has the stomach or the political will for anything like that today. And of course, you can say that the Soviet Union or the Cold War was a war, even though it was just defense spending, but you got yada yada over the millions of Cambodians and Vietnamese that were slaughtered in those wars. And then to talk about the Soviet Union dissolving, I mean, okay, you can say that it's a regime change, but we're obviously talking about like U.S.-led regime change wars here. And like I said, look, first of all, we went and pretty much took out Al-Qaeda's terror cells in Afghanistan by Christmas of 2001. It was mostly done with CIA and special ops. And then we fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban. And so if you want to say that the problem isn't overthrowing the regime, the problem is sticking around and nation building, okay, but we didn't do that in Libya. We just completely destroyed the place. And we didn't do that in Syria, and it looks like that place is on its way to being destroyed too. And yet the fact is that if you're going to do a regime change, well, the only way to really have a say in what government follows is you have to militarily occupy the place. But if you want to go around, if you, again, like I gave you a whole bunch of examples and you're saying the only one I really have is Iraq and Afghanistan, but of course Libya is an obvious other example. Well, yeah, we didn't make any of those mistakes that you suggested. We just destroyed the place, and there's open air slave markets there to this day. I mean, you guys at this point, I'll wrap up, I'm sorry, Judge, but you guys with your regime change philosophy, you have a Holocaust's worth of dead people on your conscience.
Bam. So that's a perfect response. I mean, yeah, we rebuilt entire countries. And I mean, I think we still occupy Germany, basically. And we were occupying Japan up until my understanding 15, 20 years ago. We were occupying South Korea. We just don't have the resources for that anymore. And yeah, morally, it's disgusting. Dave's completely right here. I agree.
Dinesh, how does the United States gain by its extraordinary obeisance to and financing of the government in Israel?
Andy, if I may, give me 2 minutes to respond to Dave, and then let's launch the questions, just because he got the extra 2. I just want to address a couple of specific things. First of all, I don't agree at all that somehow the United States has turned into a nation of namby-pambies and would not engage in World War II style operations. We haven't been subject to a World War II style attack. Yes, if the Chinese came over and let's just say bombed Chicago and took out the city, or wiped out 1/3 of our Navy, as happened in Pearl Harbor, I think we have a lot of appetite for responding very aggressively. It's just that we've lived in an era of where that kind of attack on the United States directly has not occurred, and therefore we've had these sort of smaller wars, at least by comparison. I think you totally misstated the history of what happened with the Taliban. You said it took 20 years to get rid of the Taliban. That's laughable nonsense. All of us were there. The Taliban was essentially out in a matter of weeks. They were gone. They were in the mountains. They were in hiding. I remember Dick Cheney saying we've run out of targets. So this was a case where the intervention itself was a massive success. Now, you said, and I think this is the fallacy here, that if you knock out the government, you have a responsibility to go and run the country. False, false, and false again. All you have.
So what is he talking about? The Taliban? Yes, the Taliban was defeated, but they're stronger than ever. We spent 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. They came back even stronger. So what the hell is he talking about? That was a success.
To do. So if you're running out a bunch of thugs, all you have to do is go and find the rival thugs who are more friendly to you and say to them, in this case, by the way, they happen to be called the Northern Alliance, we're giving the country to you. You run the country from now on. We're not telling you how to run the country. We're not telling you what policies to have or what your educational system should be. All we're telling you is you need to be a friend of the United States. That's how a mature foreign policy is run. It's been run that way, by the way, for centuries by powerful countries. When the British, for example, defeated an opponent, they didn't necessarily feel we've got to go over there. No, you basically get your friends in there and they deal with you on a different basis than the bad guys.
So the British would conquer a country and then they would basically convince another group to manage that country for them. But the British, I mean, they exploited, lots of countries, right? That's where they got their wealth, is they just basically stole it, exploited it from other countries. So is that really what he's advocating? We need to exploit countries and convince other groups to subjugate other groups? I mean, what are you saying here, buddy?
I'm going to let you respond.
Well, look, I mean, just to say that this is a mature foreign policy or something. By the way, I just never said, it's just blatantly not at all what I said. I didn't say if you depose the leader, therefore you break it, you buy it. I'm suggesting we don't go around deposing the leader. And to sit here and say that this is a mature foreign policy, like we're sitting here. So currently, we have a white hot war going on in Europe right now, which is a proxy war between all of Europe, the United States of America, and the biggest nuclear power in the history of the world. And at that point, where Donald Trump has been unable to bring this war to a close, which he promised to do on day one, he's been unable to do that. So at that point, we're going to start flirting with multiple wars of choice, wars of aggression, wars where we have not been attacked, that we do not need to fight, that risk catastrophes. There's nothing mature or wise about that. This is reckless. This is a result of living in an era of decadent elites where the most unimpressive have risen to the top. And there's absolutely no tradition of serious conservatism or right-wing thinking that would tell you that this is the move to make at this point in history. Start attacking and flirting with wars of nations that pose no threat to you, based off lies. All of them based off lies. There's no maturity in that whatsoever.
It's true. All wars are just based off lies. They lied about Vietnam. They lied about Afghanistan. They lied about, I mean, you just go on and on. They lied about Iraq. They're lying about Iran right now. And all these wars, they're just to enrich the banks and the military industrial complex. In my opinion, the country's basically become just a money laundering operation for the Pentagon. So,
answer if I may, and then we can do questions. I'm just trying to keep the even timing here. Look, so I strongly oppose this Ukraine war, and in no way do I want to take the position that I'm defending every war, defending every intervention. In fact, I think a key aspect of this debate is to ask, when is it appropriate for the U.S. to intervene at all? So my view is that we should intervene only when both our values and our interests are involved, when it is to our benefit, both in terms of values and in terms of interest. So let's take Ukraine. We may have certain common values with Ukraine, a little hard to say, but let's say we did.
I'm just going to throw out, my opinion is it's never in our interest to wreck other countries. It's just not. I don't see how it's ever in our interest to wreck another country.
We really have no interest over there. It's a very distant country. It is on the Russian border. It comes out of the debris of the Cold War. So our interests there are minimal at that.
Our interests in Ukraine are to sell bombs. That's our interest.
Now, contrast this, for example, with Iran and Venezuela. Venezuela has been a staging operation ground for hostile powers for 20 years. There are Iranian radicals sitting in the Venezuelan parliament. There are Chinese operatives in Venezuela. There are Cuban bodyguards guarding Maduro. So the idea that somehow there's this sort of innocent nation operating on its own and we just go over there. Iran is the node center of problems for the United States since the Iranian Revolution. Radical Islam has for the first time got a hold of a major state. It's difficult enough to deal with ragtag operations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but when you have a powerful country, 90 million people, very smart.
So notice all the fear mongering, right? We had to go to Afghanistan because Al Qaeda is going to attack us again, right? We got to go to Iraq because he's got weapons of mass destruction. We got to go to Libya. Gaddafi's Hitler. Everyone's Hitler. Everyone's going to kill us. It's again, it's all lies. It's all just fear mongering. I would challenge Dinesh here. Does he have any proof of what he's talking about? I don't think he does.
Possibly nuclear capacity or certainly nuclear potential. You're dealing with a serious threat. There's no other way to look at it.
Dinesh, how does the United States gain? What does the United States gain from the billions of dollars it gives to and the utter obsequious behavior it shows toward the government of the state of Israel?
The United States is not obsequious toward Israel. Israel is mostly obsequious to the United States. It makes no sense to talk about the rabbit controlling the elephant when quite clearly the elephant controls the rabbit. Case in point, the Israelis would have been really happy after the U.S. took out the Iran nuclear facilities to go in there, wipe out the mullahs, and their hand was stayed. By whom? By us. By Trump. Trump's like, I've had enough. I'm done. Now, Trump may change his mind in the aftermath of all the Iran protests of now, but the truth of it is that's a clear indication of the United States calling the shots and not Israel.
So this is a gross misunderstanding of history. I mean, obviously, especially if you read these Epstein files, this debate was before this new drop of the Epstein files, but it was obvious the tail is wagging the dog, that Israel is controlling the United States. I mean, there's hundreds of different examples. There's one example where Trump put his foot down and Israel didn't get 100% of what it wanted. Does that mean that we're not controlled by Israel? No. I mean, he's not bringing up the mountains of evidence to the contrary.
Why are we friends with Israel at all? Well, first of all, can we wake up to the fact that there is a global red-green alliance, the red representing the socialists and the leftists, as the global left is allied with radical Islam, and they're basically, who's their target? What does LGBTQ have in common with radical Muslims? Here's the answer. They are opposed to the Jews, they are opposed to the Christians, they're opposed to Israel, they're opposed to the United States, and they are united by that common hatred. So doesn't common sense tell you that it's better for the Jews and the Christians to come closer together, for America and Israel to come closer together to repel this global threat? The answer is yes. And so
again, more fear mongering. There's no evidence to support what he's saying. If you listen to Arab states, they have been clear. They just want to adhere to the, I think it was 1968 or 1967 agreements between Israel and the Arab states. Just hold to that. That's all they want. But Israel keeps taking more land, killing more people, killing more Palestinians. It's not just Palestinians. I mean, they kill anyone that's really on their land. Well, I shouldn't say that they kill anyone on their land, but they are, when you're committing a genocide, people are gonna kind of have issue with that. And he's not talking about that, right? He's leaving out a whole lot of context that there's no Muslim conspiracy to take out the West. At least, I mean, I have not seen any.
To act as if the United States is somehow kind of acting on the orders of Israel when A, we have a common interest with Israel, B, the Israelis are the best people in the world to fight radical Islam. They know how to do it. The second best, by the way, are countries like UAE. I just saw one of the leaders of UAE say anti-Semitism is an opinion in Europe and America. Anti-Semitism in UAE is illegal. There's no Muslim Brotherhood in the UAE. So the best fighters against radical Islam, number one, Israel. Number two, countries like UAE. The worst fighters against radical Islam, Australia, Canada, Europe, the United States. Don't we see that this Islamic infiltration is occurring right in the middle of our own country? I saw after Mamdani won, one of his activists said that the radical Muslims will have 50 congressmen in 10 years. So are we pretending like this is all happening, quote, over there instead of right here?
So again, this is just fear mongering. He has no proof of anything that he's saying. Fun fact, and people should check me. Iran is actually safer for Jews than Israel. All right, Iran has a healthy Jewish population that they live quite well with the native Iranians, and they're not very fond of Israel.
Dave, what does the United States gain by its obsequious behavior and enormous donations to the government of Israel?
Nothing but a lot of trouble and a lot of unnecessary wars. And I love just that Dinesh says, well, look, it's not just over there. Look, we have to fight it over here, because I was reliably informed by Dinesh D'Souza 20 plus years ago that we have to fight them over there, so we won't have to fight them over here. And then we spent 2+ decades fighting them over there, slaughtering them by the millions, blowing trillions of dollars. And now it's like, oh, look, we got to fight them over here. Yeah, that's an immigration issue. And I think our immigration policy has been horribly mismanaged. Maybe if we had listened to people like Pat Buchanan and not the neoconservatives who kicked him out of the old conservatism Inc., if we had listened to the wiser, older conservatives, we wouldn't have gotten into this mess to begin with. But the rest of this is all just totally circular. Like, look, if we support Israel and then a whole bunch of Muslims hate us because we support Israel, well, then it's proof that, see, the Muslims hate us, and therefore we have to keep supporting Israel. And as far as like the idea that we're the big power and they're a little country, well, that's true enough, but it certainly doesn't mean that they don't have influence. And I agree. I think Dinesh just kind of admitted the whole game. Yeah, they wanted us to topple the government of Iran last summer. They still want us to do that right now. And yet, so in other words, as he's admitting, they are trying to pull Donald Trump into a war that he resisted. But right after that, they came back and kept doing it. They keep moving the goalposts, and you're moving them right there with them. It was 60% enriched uranium last summer. That was the big deal. Then Trump brags that he destroyed their nuclear program. Then they moved the goalpost to intercontinental ballistic missiles, but that's not really true. They don't have any that can touch us anyway. So now we've moved it to shooting protesters. That's something now we got to launch a war over.
Right. So Dave's hitting the nail on the head, right? There's always a boogeyman. There's always some lie about why we got to go to war. There's always some villain there's always Hitler somewhere that we got to go kill Hitler somewhere. It's all nonsense.
All this talk about we should launch wars when they're in our interests and when they support our values. Well, how about the value of the just war theory of Christianity? You don't attack other countries unless they've attacked you first. You don't start wars of choice. You only fight wars of necessity. And how about the value that Congress declares the wars? I mean, you listed as one of your values preserving the Constitution. By the way, conservatism didn't do such a great job conserving that, or anything else in this country for that matter. But the Constitution is very clear. Only Congress can declare these wars. The last war that was declared by Congress was World War II. This is an absolute outrage. And the fact that anyone would even pretend to respect the Constitution at all and not have a problem that every single one of these wars are illegal is absurd.
Question for Dave. Under what circumstances can the president use military force?
Well, certainly if he's repelling aggression. If there was a situation where a country was attacking us, he certainly doesn't have to go to Congress before he can mobilize the military to defend them. And perhaps with some of the more liberal interpretations of the Constitution, you might even say that in immediate emergency, you can take some type of military action. But the idea that when there's absolutely nothing imminent and there's no threat to the country and it's a war of choice and you've got months and months and months where you're planning for it and laying down propaganda about shrug boats or something like that, the idea that the president does not have an obligation to first get a declaration of war from Congress is there is no reasonable way you could read the Constitution and think that's what it meant.
Yeah, I mean, Congress basically passes the buck to the president. Congress is, I think, full of cowards, in my opinion, and they just, oh, well, the president's bombing more people again. Oh, well.
Dinesh, same question. Under what circumstances can the president use the military?
The president is the commander-in-chief of the military. The way our government is structured, there are certain operations, for example, the passing of taxes, where it makes sense for Congress to drive the whole thing for the simple reason that you're talking about a law. Time is not of the essence. The law can be passed this year, it can be passed next year, and then the president's job is to, quote, carry it out. War doesn't function like that. A war is very often instantaneous. There's an attack, and you have to move quickly. Now, you can then seek congressional support, but the president is in fact the director of these military operations. And I can think of multiple scenarios, even ones that don't directly involve some kind of launching of a missile attack on the United States. Let's take, for example, something really simple. Let's just say tomorrow the Chinese invade Taiwan. It seems to me that, according to Dave, the president is powerless. He has to go to Congress. Now, let's remember, Congress is completely immobilized. You essentially have an ideological divide. You have block and tackle. You can't get a majority through either house of Congress, and this is why our immigration laws haven't been fixed. This is why there's no comprehensive reform of pretty much anything. So our Congress essentially is paralyzed with essentially its intellectual, ideological, and partisan divides. And so you could have all kinds of mayhem happening, and the president has got to sit tight and say, listen, we have this armed force, we have U.S. interests involved, vital interest, by the way. You have a rival country. Think of it. The number 2 country in the world, China, wants to become number 1. It undertakes blatant military aggression, which, if unchecked, will lead to other military aggression in the way that the world actually works. And yet, we need a congressional declaration, and short of a congressional declaration, the president is powerless. This is nonsense. Now, I'm not saying that we forfeit a rule of prudence. The rule of prudence is going to say, listen, are we going to necessarily get into a full-scale war over Taiwan? We've got to decide how important Taiwan is to the world and to us. We might decide Taiwan is worth sending some forces over to reinforce the power of Taiwan to defend itself. On the other hand, we're not going to commit U.S. troops, or we're going to take this action, but not that. So I'm not resolving the prudential issue of what do we do, but the idea that we are forced to do nothing is absurd.
Next question.
Okay, so I mean, his whole statement is under the context that there's some emergency. So, as we're probably going to go to war with Iran, it's looking like it. Watch for false flags. Watch for some false flag. A lot of people are predicting it. Some reason why we got to attack Iran, some emergency that's probably made up. It's probably a false flag. Well, time will tell.
This for Dinesh. Can the president blow away people on speedboats and fishing boats in the Caribbean?
The president, to do that, has got to make some kind of determination that these boats pose a threat to the United States, to our interests again. And in this case, the determination, which I'm not going to sort of attempt to evaluate here, is there is a massive narco-trafficking operation being directed out of Venezuela. So
there's no evidence of that. None. I mean, fishing boats are not a threat to the United States. Fishing boats that are 500 miles away, that have like a 50-mile range or not nautical mile range, they are not a threat to the United States. Okay, this is the Trump administration lying. This is Dinesh. He's obfuscating the facts. He knows that he's lying right now.
Maduro forfeited his oil revenues, which he forfeited for very bizarre reasons, but he did do it. The oil, by the way, the prosperity of Venezuela was by and large largely manufactured in the United States. It was our oil companies that refined that oil. So the United States, in partnership with Venezuela, had made that country really prosperous in the 1960s. But Maduro shifted his operations from oil to basically narco trafficking. He essentially became the world's biggest drug kingpin.
Maduro was the world's biggest drug kingpin. That is a straight up lie.
Now, to argue that the drugs in the United States are not a massive kind of killer, they may not be a killer in the same way as Al-Qaeda, but they've killed a lot more people than, let's say, 9/11. And so I think for President Trump, this is a real national security threat. And so the president takes action to neutralize where the threat is coming from.
Everyone knows all the drugs they're coming through Mexico or Colombia. I mean, he's just, there's no evidence. He shows no evidence to back up any of his claims, really.
Before you respond, Dave, I'm going to follow up on another question. I'll give you a chance to follow up with both. Shouldn't people be able to put into their own bodies whatever they want, Dinesh?
No. In general, yes, of course, but I would not take that principle to its absolute conclusion. I don't think, for example, that people have a right to, let's say, commit suicide. If someone was committing suicide, I was on the street, and some guy started running in front of a car, I would jump on them and try to restrain them. Why? I'm supposed to be a pure libertarian. Listen, you're running in the street. I don't see anyone stopping you. It's your choice to run in front of the car, so I'm going to let you. No, my assumption is that this guy is A, not in his right mind, B, is in some kind of catastrophe, C, will probably have a different view once he gets to settle down and get some treatment. And so similarly, I think there are all kinds of things we can do, even to ourselves, that are harmful to ourselves, but they're also harmful to the body politic in all kinds of ways. And so drugs, by the way, are not simply a matter of supply and demand. They destroy families, they destroy communities, they have wiped out entire communities in this country. So we can't ignore the larger debris that has been caused by the infestation, I think, of drugs in a widespread sense. By the way, these are drugs that are obliterating your ability to think. I mean, as libertarians, don't we value the mind being clear? Free choice itself depends on the ability to make clear decisions. If I voluntarily take a bunch of drugs that turns me into a zombie, I'm essentially out of libertarian land immediately.
Dave, I'll give you 4 minutes because there's two questions here. One is, can the president blow away people on boats in the Caribbean? And the other is, can't you put into your body whatever you want?
Yeah, ironically, when Dinesh was giving his understanding of the Constitution, I was thinking he must be high on drugs right now. So evidently not. But the idea, what Dinesh is describing is the dictator of an empire. It has nothing to do with the government that the Constitution describes, and certainly nothing to do with a president. And the idea that, just think about how vague this. It's like arguing with a postmodernist. Like, America first can mean anything that might be in our interests, and the president can bomb boats when he's determined that the boats. And then onto this drug problem. So first of all, the idea that, like, I don't know, we were talking about what's legal, what is legal and what is illegal, and you, not me, said upholding the Constitution as one of your ideals. And so I'm sorry, I guess I must have missed the clause where it says only Congress can declare the war unless they're ideologically captured, in which case then the president becomes a dictator with all the war making power. So I just think that's silly. And in terms of the drugs thing, look, man,
It's not wars. We're not talking about
Dinesh, hang on, let him finish. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, well, okay, they're not wars. So we haven't fought a war since World War II. Vietnam and Korea and Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and all of these, they're not wars. So, okay, if that's what you're, again, my point was that you argue like a postmodernist. Thanks for making the point.
I didn't say that. You just invented that. I can say all this.
Hang on, Dinesh, hang on. Don't take any of this personally. Finish, Dave. Dinesh, I'll give you all the time you want to address what he's saying.
As far as the drugs go, in terms of relation to Venezuela, this is the most obvious pretext for war that I've ever seen. The drugs coming from Venezuela make up a tiny fraction of the drugs that get into the United States of America, and almost none of the fentanyl. And so even if you were really going for the drug argument here, you would be going after Colombia or Mexico or something like that. The idea that Venezuela has nothing to do with any of that. And
Right. The drug argument is just a very weak, obvious lie.
it's just one of the many lies that were used to sell us into this war. So yes, Judge, to answer your question, I do believe people ought to have the right to put into their own body what they want to. But also, this has nothing to do with drugs anyway.
Dinesh, go ahead. You can respond.
Okay, number one, we are not at war with Venezuela. We have captured the narco trafficking kingpin of Venezuela. He's facing trial. The trial will play out as it will. His deputy is in charge. The Chavistas are completely in charge of Venezuela. Some of the Venezuelans don't like that, but that's the reality of it. So the idea that we are at war with Venezuela is just an example of the verbal promiscuity where if the United States...
So bombing a country's capital and stealing their leader, whether you like him or not, whether he's legitimately elected or not, that is an act of war. Okay, just because Venezuela, is too weak to fight back, a silly argument.
takes any action, you declare it to be a war and want to know why Congress hasn't been consulted. Same with the drug votes. Look, I agree with you to a degree that I think for Trump, this is a little bit of a pretext. I agree. This is how Trump is. So what Trump does is he has a grievance, and sometimes the grievance is a little different than the pretext. I think Trump's real grievance with Venezuela is that Maduro opened up his prisons and he sent a whole bunch of really bad guys to the United States when the Biden administration had the back door open. I think that this has pissed off Trump to no end, and Trump is looking for a reason to sort of whack that guy. So I live in the real world. I'm not saying that the world is a pretty place, that Trump even thinks in ideological terms. I don't think he does. I think that the way Trump looks at it, he's the CEO of the team United States of America. There are rival teams in the world, and there are rival teams that want bad things for us. Trump is not like Bush. He's not a neoconservative, and it's a complete misunderstanding of Trump to think, oh, it's Bush all over again. No, Trump's idea is to take a middle course between, I think, the kind of vacuous isolationism that you're recommending, Dave, and the overzealous interventionism of the Bush era. And Trump's idea is Soleimani, al-Baghdadi.
So Trump basically wants quick, easy wins, right? He wants to. Venezuela was a big win for him, right? Because he brought the military in, they fucked some shit up, they're out, right? He got a little victory parade of parading Maduro around, but it's still neocon behavior. It's still, just because he scaled down his wars of aggression doesn't mean he's not a neocon.
Grab Maduro, support the freedom forces in Iran, do it prudentially, short of war, and yet get the same result as you would if you won a war.
Dave, I guess my next question is to Dinesh and not to Dave. When the president says that the only thing that can restrain him is his own mind and his own morality, has he rejected his oath of fidelity to the Constitution and to the treaties enacted pursuant to it and to the laws written under it?
I think the fact about Trump is that he says things that are, on the face of it, ridiculous. Everybody knows it. His supporters know it too. On the other hand, the weirdness of Trump is he doesn't act that way. So almost everything he says carries a rhetorical extravagance. He's not just not anti-Semitic, he is the least anti-Semitic person in the world. Perhaps the least anti-Semitic person who has ever existed. This is Trump, like it or not. Trump is publicly ridiculously egotistical. He wants the Nobel Prize. He's happy to take Maria Corina Machado's Nobel Prize if she'll give it to him. But Trump, in reality, is actually quite humble. Narcissistical people, and I've known quite a few, don't show any interest in other people.
Trump is humble. That's jumping the shark right there.
Trump has great interest in people. He wants to know about you. He knows a lot about the people who work for him. And
Trump is good. His real superpower is he can read the room and tell people what they want to hear. Right? He's like a con man or a salesman. Right? Trump is good at that. But they just said. He just says a bunch of wacko things, but we're supposed to still trust that he's not wacko. basically what Dinesh is saying.
So the point I want to make about Trump is that he will say, throw out the Constitution. Who cares about the Constitution? And to you and me, we live in the world of words. We are wordsmiths. We're like, oh my gosh, he needs to be impeached. But then you realize every time there's a judicial ruling that says to Trump, you can't do this, you can't send federal troops to Chicago, Trump is like, I don't like it, but I'm going to do it. Trump did not like the results of the 2020 election, but guess what? He exited the stage when the day came. So you have to, with Trump, you do have this kind of verbal extravagance, but it's accompanied, I think, by prudential action. And we have learned ultimately to judge Trump in that way.
Before you respond, Dave, for those who have just joined us, and by the way, gentlemen, the two of you have produced an enormous audience across all of the platforms that are watching us. But for those of us who are just joining us, I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano. Our host program is Judging Freedom, which is the podcast that I run 3 or 4 times a day. We post about 20, 30-minute programs a week. We are doing this debate between Dinesh D'Souza and Dave Smith on what is America First on our platform and on the platform of our dear friends and collaborators at Zero Hedge. This was a Zero Hedge idea. They sort of had to twist my arm into it until they told me the two debaters would be longtime friends of mine. Back to the debate. Dave, do you want to respond to what Dinesh just said, particularly when he called Donald Trump humble?
Yeah. Well, I think all of what Dinesh just said would be, it could essentially be reduced to, yeah, Donald Trump says a lot of crazy shit and you never know what he's going to actually do, which I do kind of agree with Dinesh on. And I think the point about him
He's
leaving
been
office.
president for a term already. We know what he's going to do. He's
Go
not
ahead.
Dinesh,
Please, Dinesh, don't interrupt him. Go ahead. Dave.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, in other words, of course, all the admissions are kind of buried in what Dinesh is saying himself, that it was never about drugs, that it was never about taking their oil, that it's some type of revenge for Maduro opening his prison and sending those people up here. But again, if that's the case, then seal the border as Donald Trump has done and attempt to deport those people. It doesn't make any sense to say that we're now. But again, I guess the admission that's in there is that Donald Trump is lying through his teeth to sell this to the American people. And as far as Dinesh objecting to me calling it a war when we bomb another country, when we kill people there, when we kidnap their leader and bring him over here to face trial, I mean, I'm sorry. I remember after 9/11 when Dinesh and all of his friends said, we're at war. That's all. We got attacked. That means we're at war. And that means you'll go support invading all these countries. And even though they all turn out to be catastrophic and get millions of people killed, you'll continue advocating for more wars in the future. You know, if anything like that were to happen to us, we'd immediately recognize it for what it is. Let me say, if Nicaragua or Venezuela or Mexico, let's just say they bombed an American city. Can you imagine Dinesh D'Souza saying that was a limited military strike? It wasn't an active war. Of course, these things are active wars. Now, how much the wars expand is always up in the air. But again, as you said, yes, Donald Trump's. Listen, it's quite possible that Donald Trump never does anything further with Venezuela. But that's it. He may forget that he said anything about it tomorrow. But what he's saying right now is that we run the country. We're going to determine the next regime. We're going to extract the oil. And he told the New York Times it might be a matter of years. He in fact thinks it will be a matter of years. And then he went and requested a $1.5 trillion defense budget, which, by the way, all these fiscal conservatives like Dinesh D'Souza have no problem with whatsoever. And so, I'm sorry.
So yeah, just an anecdote on the Venezuela oil. It's never about the oil. So it takes 10 to 15 years to build up the infrastructure to extract this oil. And I think multiple oil companies have said, yeah, we're not interested because, you know, we lost, I think twice, you know, American companies have come into Venezuela and the Venezuelan people are like, no, we're taking our oil back. You know, we're not okay with Westerners or, you know, United States companies just stealing our oil basically. So, yeah, it's not about the oil. It ain't about the drugs.
It's almost impossible in this situation for us to not at least kind of take him at his word and say maybe he's serious about doing all of these things. But absolutely, if anybody else bombed America or attacked America or kidnapped our leader, even Joe Biden, even though most Republicans believe the 2020 election was stolen, I know Dinesh did a big documentary on that, most of which was completely incorrect, but even if that election was stolen and he was an illegitimate president, if somebody came here and kidnapped Joe Biden in the middle of his presidency, we would all say we're at war with that country now, because that is for us to figure out who the president of our country is.
Okay, go ahead, Dinesh. I'll let you respond.
Here's where I think we have to bring the kind of comedian view of foreign policy into line with the way the world really is. Because yes, I agree with Dave. If we had kidnapped the leader of China, we would be at war. There's a big difference between kidnapping the leader of China and kidnapping the leader of Venezuela. What's the big difference? Today, there's no difference because they're a sovereign country. The big difference is that Venezuela can't do anything to us and China can. So there's a big difference.
Right. So we picked a fight with somebody who can't fight back.
In the real world. Now, with regard to Trump's reasoning or his pretext or whatever, in the real world, we recognize that the language of diplomacy, the rhetoric of action is not the same as the cause of action. Thucydides says, for example, in the opening of the Peloponnesian War, he gives long speeches on the part of the Athenians, on the part of the Corinthians, on the part of the Spartans. And then Thucydides says this key line. He goes, whatever the parties have said, he says, in my view, the real reason for the war was the rising power of Athens and the fear that it inspired in Sparta. That's the real reason. The rhetorical reason is, oh, you crossed the border over here, you took away my fishing rights over there, you did this, you did that. That's talk. But the real reason is the motive for doing it in the first place. So the point is, I think that strategists of foreign policy, Sun Tzu, Clausewitz have understood for generations that you have to separate the kind of boilerplate rhetoric from the motives of action. And all I'm saying is that in the real world, we have genuine interests in the world. We have friends who can help us. We have enemies who can hurt us. We need to ally with our friends and undermine our enemies. And that's going to call for a moderately interventionist foreign policy.
Dave, I'll let you respond, and then I have a
Moderate interventionist. Well, just a little bit of war. just to wreck a few countries, just a few moderate countries we're going to wreck.
question for both of you, in which I will let you sum up your arguments as well. It's a question very different from what we've been discussing. But Dave, you can respond to what Dinesh just said.
Well, from this comedian's perspective, our moderately interventionist foreign policy seems to be us being the dominant force in South America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It's a moderate intervention where we have thousands of bases in hundreds of different countries all around the world. I'd say it's like the most interventionist foreign policy in world history. But okay, Dinesh, you could say this is the separation between the comedian's understanding of how these things work versus yours. But like, you were aligned with the neoconservatives, man. I'll put my track record on foreign policy up against yours any day. And it's not because of me or I'm a comedian. I just listen to all the best people like Ron.
So think of the arrogance of Dinesh D'Souza, right? He's basically insulting Dave, like, oh, you're just a comedian. You don't know what you're talking about. But Dave's been, like, everything Dave said has been right? And Dinesh has not shown any understanding of how the world works. He's just obfuscating. I think he's being dishonest, in my opinion. But oh, you comedians, you don't know what you're talking about.
Paul and Pat Buchanan, Judge Napolitano, and really wise people. And you followed like idiots like Bill Kristol around. So, whatever. Bill
Kristol's been wrong about everything his entire life. Okay. I like the term career wrong person.
I mean, yeah, I'm a comedian, but if you want to talk about the way things work if you'll notice in this debate, there's a whole lot of times where Dinesh is saying, Dave says this, but if you'll notice when I'm talking, I'm never saying that. Obviously, it would be a different thing to go kidnap the leader of China because they're a stronger country. Of course, no one's denying that. But if you really want to talk about the real world and how wars actually work and how they actually get sold, well, here's the real world. Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us of the military-industrial complex that had just been created. And those weapons companies fund think tanks where all of Dinesh's friends work and write papers. They were all sitting there, right? All of the Project for a New American Century, every think tank, all the ones that Dinesh worked for, every neoconservative, they all get big money from Lockheed Martin and Raytheon because they want to pay for people to write policy papers that advocate for more wars so that they can sell more weapons to our federal government. So in other words, a giant transfer of wealth, but worse than what the socialists want, which is from the rich to the poor, a giant transfer of wealth from the working class in America to the politically connected makers of weapons of wars. And if you drive around this country, all you got to do, this is the results, this is the fruit that Dinesh D'Souza's Conservatism Inc. has given us. Drive through the middle of this country and see all the destroyed towns all around you, all the closed factories, all the sand, where the places where people are dying from those OD deaths. And then you go drive around the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in Virginia, and see where all the multimillionaires are living who haven't produced anything. And it's not because of capitalism. It's not you go there and you see great big factories and that's why the rich people live there. It's because they work for think tanks that are funded by weapons companies.
So, yeah, two points there. One, I don't understand why, Dave's first point is there's all these think tanks and all this money that's been going to basically fuel neoconservative papers and influence, right? And it's all BS, right? We're Reagan, we talked about this before. Reagan, neocon, king of the neocons. Bush, Clinton, they're all neocons. Trump, Obama was just in my opinion, a continuation of the Bush administration, right? So they're all neocons. And yeah, you drive in this country. Go back to his first point. I don't understand why they respect Dinesh D'Souza, because he's, in my opinion, he's just another one of these guys that gets paid to be a think tank and to spout this obviously wrong ideology. And then the other big point is, we've been basically run by neocons since Reagan. Really, even Jimmy Carter is really where neoliberalism and neoconservatism came from or started. And everything's just gone to shit, right? You drive in any direction, whatever city you're at, just drive in any direction, and you just see sad, dumpy little town after sad, dumpy little town. But maybe this time it'll work.
We'll let you respond to this just before I put this final question to both of you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so for the whole of this debate, we've been hearing that foreign policy is the province of Congress. It's not the president. It is Congress that needs to make these kinds of decisions. Well, who is bought off by the defense industry? Answer, Congress. Why? Because a typical congressman has a choice, and that is to take $50 or $100 from his constituent, or to take $100,000 from Lockheed or from Raytheon. This is why Congress has appropriated these massive defense budgets. So this is a place where Dave and I are somewhat in agreement.
So Dinesh is making finally actually a good point. It's a solid point that, yes, Congress is completely corrupt. So is the president.
Except for the fact that there is a guy, by the way, who can't be bought by Raytheon, and that's because he happens to be a billionaire and his name happens to be Trump. So if there's anybody who actually doesn't need the contribution from Lockheed in order, for example, to have a nice house or to have a nice car or to go on vacations, it's not Congress. Congress actually does. They need money for their re-election campaign.
So basically he's trying to say that Trump is not corrupt. I think that's nonsense. I think Trump is just as corrupt as all these other politicians. And, is he really a billionaire? I don't really think Trump is a billionaire. That's my opinion, but yeah.
They're the ones who sit down with the lobbyists. They're the ones who vote these appropriations. Trump doesn't decide what the defense budget is. Congress does. So yes, we find an area of some common agreement. We agree that the whole appropriation stuff, domestic and foreign policy, is a racket. But I think where we disagree is that you somehow think that that is what is leading Trump down the wrong path. And I say not at all. That is actually why Congress is, to some degree at least, bought and paid for.
All right, I'm going to give each of you, hold on. I'm going to give each of you 5 minutes to reply. You first, Dave, and you can incorporate anything you want. But the initial question for your 5-minute reply is, who is more faithful to the Constitution, Donald Trump or Thomas Massey? Now, Dave, you can take it from there. Take your 5 minutes, and then Dinesh can respond as he sees fit. This is your closing argument.
I mean, you might as well ask whose name is Thomas Massey. I mean, that one's pretty obvious. And again, Dinesh is kind of just talking past the point that I'm making, because I'm not saying whether Congress should have the power or not. I'm saying the letter of the law is clear. If you believe what you just believe, then if you care about the Constitution, then you should be advocating that we amend the Constitution. I mean, it's really that simple. And yes, Dinesh will at the end admit that this whole thing is a racket, including foreign policy. But of course, he's advocating you give that racket more power. I wanted to end. I'm going to do.
Let me just add Thomas Massey. So I've been following politics, or interested in politics since 2016. Thomas Massey is basically literally the only congressman that is not corrupt. Okay, and watch how people, the people in power attack him like crazy, like he's smallpox or something. Like, and he's just he's just a regular guy that's a congressman, is from what I can see. And I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I definitely respect him that he is the only congressman that is not corrupt.
My closing statement, something a little bit more meta. I think I've already demonstrated the America First part, but it's funny because before we got on, you guys were talking about how in 1983, I guess that's the year Dinesh graduated college, I believe, and that's the year I was born. So I was born in 1983. Dinesh basically went into Conservatism Inc. in 1983, and he had something that was real. Like Dinesh had a real platform. I mean, worked for a presidential administration, was in the game in a time where it wasn't like today. It wasn't like everyone had a platform. It really meant something to be a part of Conservatism Inc. And obviously, you had a profoundly important goal, which was what? To conserve the best parts of America. Now, juxtapose that to me, I really started blowing up in 2020. I mean, I've been around for a little bit, but my audience started really growing in 2020. And one might ask themselves, what had been conserved? What had been conserved by the time we got to 2020? Well, was it the Constitution? Was it the Bill of Rights? No, we shredded those long ago. Was it Christianity? The country was more atheist and secular and tribal and divided than ever before. The country wasn't nothing. The cultural dynamics, the racial dynamics, the economic dynamics. By the time I came around, this is how much had been conserved. The debate was over whether my 4-year-old boy ought to be turned into a girl. That's what I inherited. That's how good you guys did. But what I did also inherit was $39 trillion in debt and an ocean full of the blood of innocent people. That's what we inherited. And I see Dinesh D'Souza coming back around now, almost trying to gatekeep. I saw Dinesh on an interview, and he said, the problem is we used to have an Irving Kristol, and we used to have a William Buckley, and they would decide who's allowed in and who's allowed out. But now we don't have anyone that can say Tucker's not allowed in, and Candace isn't allowed in, and Nick Fuentes isn't allowed in. But the thing is that you guys blew it. You guys completely blew it. Honestly, Dinesh, that means I like you. As a dude, I really like you, and I've actually enjoyed a lot of your work. I've learned things from you. I think you're a brilliant guy. But for you to come out, I'm sorry, after supporting the war in Iraq, I think you should leave this game. I don't.
Honestly, I don't know what Dinesh has been correct about. I've never heard him be correct about anything, but I haven't followed him that much. But yeah, he's making a great point. Like, okay, we've been trying Reaganism for 50 years now, and it's not working. So why are we going to continue with the same bullshit?
I think you should be giving your opinions anymore about a war that you're supporting. I just think that anyone messes up that bad in any field, you got to leave and go find a different field. But so the fact that you're coming around and saying Candace is wrong and Tucker's wrong, honestly, with respect, I think it's time for you to sit down and understand that we're here now. We're leading this movement now, and we've had more cultural victories in the last 5 years than you guys put on the board in 30.
Dinesh, 5 minutes, please.
Number one, in the interview that Dave is talking about, I was deploring the fact that the intellectual quality of our debates has deteriorated. We used to have debates on firing line with people like Buckley, Jeane Kirkpatrick, Irving Kristol, Robert Bork, and now we have debates with Candace Owens talking about Charlie Kirk being a time traveler, and of course we have Dave Smith, and then we have Tucker talking about why Sharia is not such a bad idea, why Maduro is a real conservative. So there has been an intellectual degeneration. I think it's true. People like Irving Kristol would be a little embarrassed to be listening to this kind of claptrap. Number two, the people who haven't lived through the 80s and 90s don't recognize the triumphs of Reaganism, of which I will mention only two. I agree that you were an infant, and I agree that you didn't really have your mental faculties, but the point is you're supposed to read history and look back a little bit and see important things were conserved. The top marginal tax rate in 1980 when Reagan came to office was 70%. Let that sink in. Of an additional dollar in the top rate, you had to give 70 cents to the government. Reagan brought it down to 28. 28%. That's a fiscal revolution. Trump came.
So Reagan lowered tax rates on the rich. He basically gave the country to the super rich. Okay. And he's saying this is a victory.
Can't even come close. So all the victories of right now you're talking about, they pale before the reduction of a top tax rate from 70% to 28. By the way, it's up to about 39% now, but it's not even close to 70.
I'm aware.
Yeah, all right. Now let's talk about the Cold War. You had a Soviet empire that stretched across multiple time zones, that controlled all of Eastern Europe, that had giant orbit all over the world, and a huge arsenal of weapons pointed at us. Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. The world is vastly better off. We all fought for that. We were successful. Now, did we win all our battles? No. Andy was there. Andy Napolitano can tell you the affirmative action battle that I was an active part of. I wasn't part of the Iraq debate. I was part of the affirmative action fight. My early books in liberal education, The End of Racism. Now, the affirmative action DEI complex had massive support. Every university, every corporation was pushing it. There were about 5 guys on the other side whom I could name. Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, me, Glenn Lowry, maybe 2 other guys. So 6 of us are fighting a giant industry, well established across the country, and we won. We get a Supreme Court decision. DEI is now being unraveled. So if you want to know what we fought for, that's what we fought for, and that's what we conserved. Now, you've come along in a generation where it is your guys who basically promoted the trans culture. It's younger people ultimately who have voted in all this stuff, and now you're trying to blame it on the Reagan generation. We didn't do all that. You did. It's your generation that voted for it. It's your activists who are showing up protesting for Palestine, this, DEI, that. You know, we want to open the borders. The immigrants are our friends. They came yesterday, but they're Americans today. All of that stuff, if you want me to take blame for what everyone did in the 80s, you need to take the blame for Obama. You need to take the blame for everything that's happened in the last 12 years. We need to apply an even standard. I think we conserved a lot given the forces that were available to us. In some cases, we were grossly outnumbered. But did we promote gay marriage? No. Did I promote the trans movement? No. Yes, I was wrong on Iraq, but I was right on a lot of other things. And so the idea I'm going to be banished from the conservative movement because I called it wrong on Iraq, at least I'm man enough to admit it. Whereas you, the Iran strike will lead to World War III. Doesn't happen. Not a word of regret, not a word of apology. Not a, I was wrong, I was an idiot. I didn't call it. So,
hang on. 1 minute, Dave.
I know you want a second closing statement.
No closing statement. No closing statement. It's just, you made that up. I never said it. That's
okay, you thought the
Yeah, so that's a straw man argument that Dinesh is using. He's saying, "Oh well, Dave he doesn't agree with all the DEI nonsense. Neither do I." But yeah, Dinesh is basically making a straw man argument that because he doesn't have a legitimate argument on his own merit. As far as the Soviet Union, I mean, a lot of theorists believe that it was our aggression towards the Soviet Union that fueled that they probably would have collapsed, earlier without all this militarism. So I wonder. What would have history been like without all the militarism? So I don't know. Is that a W? I don't know. When the Soviet Union, I mean, I was a kid during the 80s when the Soviet Union collapsed. My life didn't improve all of a sudden. Did your life improve all of a sudden just because we don't have the Russians to fight? Actually, if anything, it got worse because now, again, remember the beginning of the conversation. We always have to have a boogeyman. There's always some villain, right? So the Soviet Union used to be the big villain. So now they're grasping at straws to find a villain like, oh, fishing boats 500 miles away. That's our big boogeyman.
Iran strike was a great idea.
No, I never said it would lead to World War III. You just made that up.
That was just
All right, we'll stop. I think you guys are both super smart.
All right, yeah, I'll stop there. I think all wars are bullshit and they're all based on lies. If there's the government's been lying about every war since that we've ever been in, even World War II, and I'm a big fan of FDR. I mean, he still lied about World War II. So yeah, to think that this is the one that we're not lying about, getting lied to, come on, really? Yeah.